It's time to move on to our mentor talk by Dr. Vishwesha Guttal, currently an associate professor at Center for Ecological Sciences at ISC and also an associate faculty with the Center for Biosystem Science and Engineering. We have heard two chemical engineers speak so far. Now it's time for physicists. Vishu trained as a physicist and does exciting work on collective behavior and theoretical ecology. Over to you, Vishu.
Hi, Mohit. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I'm unable to share my screen. Oh, now I can. Okay. I hope you see my screen. Is that right?
And not in the full screen mode.
Oh, not in the full screen mode. Okay.
Yes.
Is it not in the full screen mode yet?
Not yet.
How about now?
No, not yet.
Okay. Let me do one thing. I'll just change my I'll try again. How about now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks, YIM, for this opportunity to share my journey. So today I'll talk about my sort of random walk from physics to biology, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. So of course, as I start, I have a few caveats. First of all, I have kept this fairly light, and even more importantly, whatever I'm going to share about my journey of science in the last 10 years or so is based on my experience alone. But all of us are unique, and therefore my experience is either positive or negative, will not be same for you, and each of us carve out our own journeys and learn from each other. Okay, so this is my sort of brief career trajectory. I dropped biology in my high school, in my what we call PUC in Bangalore, and because I somehow did not appreciate biology back then, but I was absolutely fascinated by physics, and part of the reason for that was the amazing planetarium we have in the city. I moved to do undergraduate in physics at IIT Kanpur, where I fell in love with non-equilibrium statistical mechanics and how we can apply that to biology. And then I continued to do my PhD in physics at Ohio State University. And, I had a pretty enviable office. In fact, I was sitting, in one of these, glassed corner seats. It was really fabulous. And then I moved now I was back in biology after a gap of more than 10 years, after my 10th class, I think. Okay, in a biology department, doing my postdoctoral research. So that was my career trajectory before I became a faculty member at IAS. And of course, this was largely driven by various inspiring teachers and mentors. I must really acknowledge right away. At planetarium in Bangalore, Madhusudan, his sort of infectious sort of curiosity for science was really amazing. And Debashish Chowdhury, a physicist who was doing biological problems in IIT Kanpur, and my PhD advisor Jayaprakash, he really taught me how to do science. What is science? Not just solving problems, but what is it to do science? And finally, at Princeton, Ian Cousin, my postdoc advisor. Okay, and then at the end of this 10 years or odds from my undergraduate to postdoc, I joined CES at IAC, which was truly a dream place to be. It's very, very well known for its contribution to ecology and evolution across the world. It has a very collegial environment, fabulous colleagues. And we had just moved to a new building. Of course, the old people in the CES did not like the new building, but as a new faculty, I absolutely loved it because we really got very good lab space. And then IAC offered very generous startup grant for someone like me. Okay, now coming to my science, I was my background was in physics, and my PhD and postdocs were both basically using mathematical techniques and applying them in the context of ecology. Whereas my PhD was looking at ecosystem scale problems, in my postdoc, I was looking at group level problems. How do animals move in groups? So what are the evolutionary basis for doing so? So these were two broad topics I was trained. And by the end of my PhD, I had lots of theory papers in both of these fields. But apart from, one sort of, nominal data set somewhere in the paper to sort of, please some reviewers, I really had not worked with data. And when I joined IASC, I decided, I really want to sort of take a new direction, which is to sort of integrate theory and data. I can keep on doing more theory. I was feeling very, very comfortable doing so. I thought that was something I could easily do, but I was feeling that, my learning of the field of biology will be incomplete if I do not sort of, marry, sort of, if I were to use a cliched phrase, theory and data. Okay, so in that direction, I sort of, I decided in my mind, this is going to be the broad direction, despite my lack of skills on training in that direction. And in the process, by the way, I also applied to YIM. I know within a few months of me joining IASC, as a faculty member, there was a YIM coming up, and then I applied, and I was a bit impatient. I asked them, what happened to my application? They asked me, wait a bit, you will know the results soon. Okay, so in the meantime, I started building the lab. And, as you know, to build the lab, the most important, ingredients are students. And I was extremely lucky. These are the 5 students from the lab who have now graduated. And, they really did an amazing job. Of the 5 people, 4 of them actually had both theory and data in their thesis. And that to me, is a, really was possible. My sort of, my goal and aim to achieve that integration was only possible because of these students. And the only one who could not do was primarily because, sometimes data don't, look the way we would like them to see, but broadly, we were very happy. I'm sort of very happy that I got these students who sort of propelled me to achieve, these goals. Now, how did I go about doing that? As you know, as a PI, we all think we must be the taskmaster, and we need to have all the tools to get the students going. And so did I think so. I should move students in the right direction. But you should realize that students have their own defenses, and they're also well armed. So therefore, one of the quick learning I did in the very first 2 years of my mentoring, of which none of us really have any training, is that just because we think we had a great academic path, we obviously would want that to replicate on students. But we need to realize that it is their path, and insisting them to follow the path that worked for me won't work for them. So the best strategy for mentoring, which I have learned over the last decade or so, is that let students free to carve their own path. Of course, our role is to provide robust feedback mechanisms to see how they are doing in their achieving their goals, and our role is to help them in the process of finding their own path. And of course, in some sense, it's easier said than done. We now have massive expectations from grants as well as tenure processes that are set across various institutions, and this sort of a lot of freedom for students appears in I would say in a superficial way at conflict with the philosophy of letting students free. But I think that at least in many of us in the sort of well-funded institutions do have the luxury to sort of train students to really achieve help them achieve their potential, while also they sort of help build a lab. And the way, it was really interesting experience for me, and I was, as I said, I was extremely lucky that I had great students, and a lot of our science, and not just the science that we wanted to do, but also the process of science. Whatever my advisor had taught me, sort of the way he taught me science, I was able to sort of inculcate a very similar culture through a lot of informal meetings and discussions, over coffee and tea. And of course, lab must be fun, not just always science. And we never missed any opportunity to celebrate. And most important of them being celebrating birthdays. And of course, we have a policy that mangoes and ice creams really need no reason. Whenever any of us feel like, let us celebrate. And we sort of intersperse these lab activities with various also lab outings. They are great fun. They sort of help us build as a sort of, go out as a team. Although we are all together in the same lab space, we are often in, working in silo, even in a shared space. But I think, these kind of, activities really help us think of, lab as not just individuals working for their own goals, but also as a team. So also surprisingly, in none of these events we plan to do science. And of course, let us not forget that we also have formal lab meetings. But nevertheless, again, thanks to students, they always kept. The students in my lab, as you could see here, always kept the lab meetings also extraordinarily fun. Okay, I had really no role in most of the things I'm showing today. It was just letting students, take charge of the lab environment. So in the process, of course, grants are really important for us to function. I had a really generous startup grant from IASC, and two grants, DBT Ramalinga Swami grant was extraordinarily useful for me, for the very simple reason that, it had no budget heads. It just had something called a research grant that you could use for anything. It could range from consumables to computers to international travel of not just me, but even for the students. So, I really wish that, the funding agencies sort of, increase these kind of, no bar grants, with, even if the budget is small, but the flexibility that this grant offered was really amazing. I also had a few other grants, travel grants, and so on. And one thing I learned that a judicious use of grant is not just investing more money into experiments, but luckily, because I had this DB3 grant, which was unrestricted, also a collaborative grant, sending students to international meetings was easy, and that I realized, after it actually happened, that dramatically increased their own confidence. Of course, they knew they had all these techniques, but the moment they were in the international arena, they figured out that they're actually remarkably good as well. They can compete as well as anybody in the world, and that was really, really important for them to know. And I sort of have tried to keep the tradition, although now I don't have a DBT Ramalinga Swami like grant. Okay, and of course, in the process, I received a number of invitations which I mostly accepted, in Indian conferences as well as conferences abroad. I think these both types of conferences were really amazing, and I think whenever we have opportunities, we should really take both of these, attending Indian conferences to sort of spread the word about what you're doing here. And of course, in my case, at least, because there were very, very few people who did these kind of research work, including theory and data and biology, the visits abroad was really helpful to meet the international collaborators and peers, which in turn led to more invitations to me and more collaborations and papers. And I was also very pleased that in India, there was a lot of interest in mathematical ecology and biology. And, in fact, to the extent that there was no way I could even say yes to so many collaboration requests, and I hope that, more institutes hire people with mathematical training in biology departments. So now next comes the important part of being a faculty, which is teaching. Although IASC is a research institution, we do teach, of course, much less than, let's say, IITs and ISERs and universities. But nevertheless, this was a remarkable surprise to me that I absolutely love teaching. And I use something called active learning methods, where students basically discover concepts on their own. I would set up a scenario and teach one simple concept, but the bigger part of the conceptual learning was done through group discussions and presentations every week in the class. And I think this really worked really well. And I was actually able to do this even in the online mode, using the breakout room feature in the Zooms. And of course, what I realized was teaching in our own institutes is often insufficient. Of course, we get really good students, but we have a very limited reach within our institutes, and our students often already have a lot of exposure. Therefore, participating in workshops, I found that to be really remarkable, because then I could reach out to students from all over the country, both from well-funded institutes as well as from smaller colleges and state universities. And this process of teaching, I can confidently say that over the 10 years, on an average, at least a couple of students from mathematics and physics have turned to ecology. And while also I think that, based on the feedback I received, I could also see that biology students who were scared of math now were beginning to appreciate math. And to me, this was really, really satisfying that the work that we do and the teaching we do has remarkable reach. And of course, the teaching classes which has many undergraduate students is really fabulous. Not only because it's fun and they ask great questions, they also have led to research projects and papers led by UG students in our lab. Okay. Now, another very important point of being a faculty member, as we all know, is service and administration, which we secretly hate. But it's really important that this is we do it well. And the way I personally achieved this was to sort of align my own interests with the administration work. And of course, my interests were broadly academic, followed by student welfare. These were the two interests I have always had. And then I made sure that my sort of energy into administration goes into these two streams. And of course, academic part is actually quite easy. And I would really encourage new faculty to sort of take up as simple as, coordinating seminar program in the departments, or it could be annual research symposiums. And these are almost, even if there's absolutely zero budget, one can still do by inviting local speakers and now Zoom speakers anywhere in the world. And then I also initiated and organized major conferences in ecology, not only mathematical ecology, but also broadly in ecology, and workshops for students on various skills. And I have also been interested in doing outreach in my mother tongue, Kannada, and that has also been, given me avenues to talk to people outside the academic boundaries. For example, software engineers interested in science, artists interested in science, and to speak to them in local language has been really, really amazing. And then to continue the second part of my interest, student welfare, somewhat by accident and somewhat by sort of intention, I think I was also inducted into what is called IAS Student Advisory Committee that sort of deals with many student issues, difficulties they face. And in the department, myself and my colleague Kavita, we established something called a department workplace wellness committee to address various issues that the students were facing. It could be all the way from bullying by a peer to issues like faculty student conflicts and even mental health. And then which eventually helped us set up an IAC wellness center, which was eventually and our department wellness committee became a model for the entire IAC to set up in department level workplace wellness committees. Okay, so now I have given you a broad overview. All of this seems good and fine, but let me also briefly tell you what was the science that we did and how did we go about doing and what were the challenges that we faced in this journey. Okay, now I have two broad areas of research work. One is called the tipping points, where things dramatically change in a very short period of time. And then we have, and as I told you in the beginning, I was interested now in not just doing theory like I did in my PhD, but I also now wanted to work on data. And in the process, I worked with data sets from China, Africa, and even financial systems. And we did a lot of collaborations. And one of the main findings was sort of in coherence with what my PhD thesis was telling, that stochasticity in real world becomes so much more important that lot of modeling and theory work ignores. And luckily, my PhD thesis was focused on understanding stochasticity, and that sort of background really helped me analyze these data sets very well. And another area of research that I work on is collective behavior in animal groups. And this is where I was now not using others' data, but we were now doing our own experiments. And as you can imagine, every experiment we tried failed over years. Okay, and we had some crazy logistical nightmares. And finally, one day I decided, okay, everything we are trying is failing. Let us just replicate an analysis that somebody else had done 10 years ago, or maybe like 7 years ago, which was on locust swarms, but let us just do it with our system, which is fish schools. And at that stage, we had no new hypothesis when we were doing this. And then something really surprising happened. which is that we got totally new results, almost exactly the opposite type of results as they had found in locust swarms. And what was also remarkable was that some general theory I had read on the side during my PhD, that those equations literally popped out of the data sets we were analyzing in our lab. And that led to this paper, where we showed that randomness in the animal behavior actually promotes order. Okay, and then this in turn led to a few other papers where we showed that randomness or noise or stochasticity has very interesting consequences when animals are in groups. Okay, now I'll just show you one small snippet of the fish schools, which I'm sure you would all agree that show really fascinating patterns. These are entirely spontaneous patterns. We are not providing them any stimulus. We're not providing any sort of training as well. These are their natural sort of behaviors in the lab, of course. Okay. And we also are studying at a very large scale. What you're really seeing are ungulates, blackbuck. These are in the grasslands, and these videos are shot using drones. Okay, and right now we are in the process of publishing this work, so I won't go into much more details. And over these 10 years, of integrating theory with data, I have now worked on many systems. On the bottom right corners, you are seeing neural crest cells in collaboration with folks from NIMHANS, mosquitoes, blackbird, beetles, and fish. Okay, so now I have sort of covered broad sort of outline of what all are the responsibilities of a new faculty member, from setting up the lab to sort of conferences to teaching and administration. I don't know how much time do I have, Mohit? Another 10 minutes or 5 minutes?
Yeah, around 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll try. So I'll just try to talk about the challenges we faced. Of course, not everything was smooth. And the biggest challenge we faced was in actually getting publications out. Let me tell you the challenges we faced. So this is if you look at the number of publications from our lab, this is how it was. 3 papers in 2012, of which 2 were sort of continuation from my postdoc, 2 in 2013 that were entirely done after joining here, and then one in the next 3 years. And that was the feedback time at IASC. And they told me these are the red flags. Every one of your paper has an international collaboration. So how do we know that the work you're doing is yours? Okay. Okay. This is if you are in the interdisciplinary area, and this is a question that you probably will get if you collaborate. And this did happen to me, but luckily, I went back and I explained to them. Of course, there's another major flag that your PhD students have not yet published. Who UG students have published, but not PhD students. Okay, these were the 2 issues that they raised. But of course, I went back and told them, hey, look, interdisciplinary work that involves theory and data requires collaborations. I cannot generate data in China and Africa. Okay, and I have to collaborate with them. And of course, we do have our own data that's coming out very, very soon, entirely from our lab. So, but luckily, the red line that I showed you turned green. And then within the 2 years, I had 8 more papers that checked all the boxes that a reviewer would typically look for. Okay, but I think it's really important to recognize that international interdisciplinary work, especially with theory and data, requires collaborations of all type, across labs, across countries, and across disciplines, of course, right? And then of course was another issue, a reason why we struggled with publication, because integrating theory and data is incredibly challenging. There are theory papers, there are data papers, but doing them together requires a new set of skills which I did not have myself. And there is this sort of graph that one can think of, a difficulty axis. You want to avoid very difficult, low novelty sort of work. You want to ideally work on low hanging fruit, which is low difficulty but high novelty, but I don't know if they even exist. But what often ends up, when we try really interesting problems, they're often high difficulty and they potentially have a novelty, but they also take a very, very long time. And I think, I miscalculated, and all of our project ended up in this top right corner, which slowed down the publication. We struggled to write. And in fact, I myself was not familiar. What will reviewers ask if I have both theory and data in the same paper? I had a good experience with theory papers, but not when I had both. And of course, I think we were trying too many exciting ideas. One finished paper looks good on paper, then then the claim that I have 10 papers with all exciting results, but I'm just writing it up. So I think this is a important point to keep as you are working on your own new labs. And of course, if this is a graph representing tenure cycle of a new professor and that of a student, if you're starting your lab at 0th year and you expect to file your tenure papers in year 6, but remember that's by the time, that's also just the time when your first student who joined probably 1 year after you started your lab also is submitting the thesis, which basically means that assuming everything goes well, your first student will be submitting his or her thesis when you submit your tenure papers. If your first student fails, your tenure file may also fail. So even in my case, my first student's paper came just before what in IASC called the grace period before you submit your papers. I think the solution for this is, take a few more students in the first 2 years than one would do maybe 10 years ago. Okay. And of course, because of the expectations, there are slow timelines in, publications these days. Just to give you a couple of examples here, ideation in print took 6 years for this paper, which had both theory and data. Okay. And this was my tenure line, right? And again, this paper, the experiment began in year 2, but the actual print happened in year 9. It took 7 years to sort of see through it fully. And of course, by the time my promotion papers came, I still hadn't published it. We were still writing it up. So, we have to account for this, when we are starting new ideas, have sufficient room for errors and things going out of the way. And of course, another biggest challenge is, how do we get best out of students? And mentoring is a really, really big challenge. We would like to promote, and our aim should be to promote student welfare and academic productivity, right? But mentoring for each student it requires a lot of tailoring to their needs. I would say in my, at least philosophy that I follow is, no micromanaging, be empathetic, and be generous with credit and authorship. And emphasize teamwork. It's really important that students develop a culture of teamwork. The work that they are doing is because 10 other things failed when a previous student was working. And of course, in some sense, my best strategy for mentoring, which is that, leave students as free as possible, of course, with, mechanisms for rigorous feedback. And of course, there are lots of skills we need to teach them and to keep them motivated. And one universal feature that I have found across all labs and all PIs is that students struggle to write. I think a good training from the very beginning on how to write makes a huge difference to the lab productivity itself. Okay. And then a few miscellaneous items I wrote. I don't know if I really have time to go through. I know one of the things I was able to finish a few papers, but because I just accepted invitations to submit papers to special issues. Because the papers that would never have been done got done because I had a very strict deadline, and both me and students could work on those. And it's really important to find good collaborators, which is really hard, by the way, but also important to avoid cynical and exploitative people, as Harmit was pointing out. If you see red lines in the beginning, find ways to avoid those people. And contribute to your workplace, because you're going to stay there for a really long time, 20 to 30 years, maybe even longer if you join early enough. And while we contribute, we must also be critical and constructive. That is my philosophy. That has been my philosophy, including in public. And now many scientists are on social media. It's a great way to network with all, PIs of all career stages. But define your own boundaries and how do you plan to use social media? Okay. And teaching helps remarkably, as I have mentioned. And I have a folder in my in my Gmail, which is called Nice Emails folder, where I store all good news I receive. It could be about acceptance of publication, or it could be about also about nice email that a student appreciated about your course. Okay, so finally, the biggest challenge is the administration of grants. I will not say anything. I really can't say anything. Mohit asked me, what is the thing that you like very least? It would be in my list, that would be grant administration. Okay, and what keeps us going, right? It's because there are massive challenges in running a lab. I would say that, on the science side, to me, things like the fact that, fish ecosystems, that the fact that they all follow really elegant mathematics is really, really inspiring to me. I still can't believe the day when I saw that the fish data we analyzed actually threw up this equation like magic. And, of course, the student feedback, I think, matters a lot. Some of the feedback I receive, I, very nicely, save them on as a nice emails folder, and they provide a lot of inspiration for us to sort of keep putting our energy to sort of train more students and so on, especially when somebody says, your course gave me much near distraction from dry core physics courses. I myself was a physics student, I really know what they mean. Okay. So in summary, I will skip this slide entirely. Develop a vision, understand the system. It's really important to understand the system, and then having done that, go achieve your vision. Of course, brace for rejections. The rejections will be norm. And I was just telling you about my in the beginning, right? Recall my YIM 2012 application. I had just landed as a faculty member, right? And when I asked them, what is the result, I was asked to wait for a bit. I was asked to wait a bit. That I didn't expect that I had to wait 10 years until Mohit emailed me in 2000, just a couple of months ago. Can you give a talk, in YIM 2022? Okay, with that note, I would like to thank all of you for your attention. I think I took a little extra time. I'm really sorry. But if I have time, I will be happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Vishu, for that exciting talk, mentioning about all different dimensions of life of a new PI, and of course, how you have navigated that landscape very, very engaging manner for both you as well as the entire lab. So in the interest of time, we'll take only one question, Vishu, if that's okay. And if you don't mind,
sure.
Answer the ones in the chat later.
Sure.
So the question is, how do you find a balance when students start to consider PI as a friend and then ignore the advice given? Now, this can be an academic setup or in professional development setup.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really important question. I think we need to distinguish and draw boundary between being friendly and being a friend, right? And those are very fundamentally different things. One can be friendly, but one can also say, hey, look, I'm not your friend. I think that boundary one needs to establish early enough. If you don't do, I have indeed seen some cases where it can lead to problems. How do you do? In my case, I sort of, make it very clear that, I think now the age gap between me and my students are much more. It's much easier. I think in the initial stages when the age gap is really small, I think that's where you really have to be cautious and, make it very clear. I will be friendly, but remember, at the end of the day, I'm still going to give you these critical feedback, and and that's my job.
Great, thanks so much, Vishu. I think that was a great point, and also many of the points that you brought about collaborations. I think that we'll take them up related questions as well as discussion in the panel discussion. Thanks so much once again, Vishu.
Thanks.
And yeah, I think as they say, so 10 years later, we got back. So yes, thanks once again for accepting this invite. And yeah, here is a meme. Okay. And we'll wait for a few minutes. There's a brief break, and within 5 minutes, we'll start with the panel discussion.